Assalamu alaikum, dear believers. Um, Inshallah, you are all doing well. I am honored. I'm Dr. Aisha El-Amin, and I am honored on behalf of Imam Tariq El-Amin, resident Imam of Masjid Al-Taqwa, and the Ta'leem Committee, which I am the chair of, with my wonderful colleagues, Dr. Lionel Allen, Dr. Gloria Bashir, and Brother Shamsuddin Sadiq. I want to welcome you to today's Ta'leem. The format today will be a lecture with a question and answer. And the topic for today is Allah heard her, or God heard her. I want to make a few notes before we get started. We will be recording today, so please be aware that we are recording. And we also will have this as well as future Ta'leems and our khutbahs available on our YouTube channel for Masjid Al-Taqwa. So if you have not already liked and subscribed, please do to Masjid Al-Taqwa's YouTube channel. So without further ado, our topic is Allah heard her. But before I introduce our guests, I have a few folks with their mics hot. If you can mute yourself, I will be muting folks if I hear you throughout, because we want to make sure that we have full attention to our guest facilitator today. So thank you for that. I just heard the background noise leave. So we have Dr. Harriet Lewis with us today, which is such an honor. She's a social inclusion consultant and senior advisor. Over her professional career, she's also led organizations that have served women, refugees, youth, and small business owners. Her current focus is on fostering opportunities to further social and economic development with people, organizations, and companies within and outside of the United States. And as you have seen throughout the Women's History Month, we have had a wonderful array of women in our community who are just absolutely brilliant. And so she joins that. We've had, of course, last week, Dr. Majid, we had Dr. Constance, and now we have Dr. Harriet. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to my brilliant and beautiful sister to impart some knowledge and start some discussion amongst us today. Dr. Harriet.
Assalamu alaikum. Let me see if I can unmute myself. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I am honored to be here today. Thank you, Dr. Aisha El-Amin, for this opportunity to present again today at Masjid Al-Taqwa. I am humbled and honored to be in the company of so many inspirational women this month. I saw on Facebook, 5 African-American Muslim women doctors. So I am honored to be in this company. I want to thank everybody again for the invitation. Today's talk is entitled, God Sees Her, Allah Sees Her. So let me bring my slide up. Okay, let me just shrink myself a little bit so I can read. So today's talk is God Sees Her, Allah Sees Her. If you can tell by the background here, I love this image. This is an image of the Great Mosque of Janneh. I've never been there. I hope to, inshallah, travel there one day. It's in Janneh, Mali. Since this Ta'leem is on, it's typically when it's done in person, it's in the masjid. I thought I'd just, share a slide of a masjid today as well, one that I hope to visit one day. Before I start, I would like to offer the disclaimer that my talk today covers domestic and gender-based violence, and I don't want to cause any emotional distress for anyone. And if you think that this conversation may send you to a place of distress, please feel free to go off camera or mute me or do something, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. One thing that was mentioned, but I want to further focus on, the reason why I'm focusing on this topic. In my background, I worked in places of gender-based violence, and I always try to find some time, whenever it's appropriate, which is always appropriate because the statistics are epidemic and pandemic as it relates to domestic and sexual violence against men and women. And so, but yeah, I've worked in many spaces as it relates to this topic. And so we're going to talk about it today. Allah sees her. So today's scripture or surah reading is coming from Surah 58, Mujadala, ayah 1 through 3. And I will read, and you could read as well, ayah 1. Indeed, Allah has heard the argument of the woman who pleaded with you, O Prophet, concerning her husband, and appealed to Allah. Allah has heard your exchange. Surely Allah is all hearing, all seeing. Ayah 2. Those of you who sinfully or disobediently divorce their wives by comparing them to their mothers should know that their wives are in no way their mothers. None can be their mothers except those who gave birth to them. What they say is certainly detestable and false. Yet Allah is truly ever pardoning, all forgiving. And then the third, those who divorce their wives in this manner then wish to retract what they said must free a slave before they touch each other. And I apologize, I can't read the bottom of this. I'm going to try to move my bar. This penalty is meant to deter you, and Allah is all aware of what you do. So the 3 points, before I go into the 3 points of the day, some of you may be familiar with these ayah. Some of you may not. I love this particular revelation and how God shows up. Some of you, this is a story of a woman named Khawla bint Thalaba, whose husband Al-Samit had refused to divorce her. And instead he chose to do a practice that was custom at that time called zihar. And zihar is a practice where you proclaim that instead of divorcing your wife, instead of liberating your wife from marriage, if you will, and divorcing her and letting her be, this practice of zihar is basically holding on to her, controlling her by saying that she is as if your mother, and you will not touch her, you will not be with her in any way because she is as if your mother, and then you can go on to be as you need to be. So that is the context of this talk today. And the 3 points today that we're going to focus on are the pleading woman, Allah the regulator, and furthering justice. And again, we're going to start again with verse 1. Indeed, Allah heard the argument of the woman who pleaded with you, O Prophet, concerning her husband, and appealed to Allah. Allah has heard your exchange. Surely Allah is all hearing and all seeing. So we see in this first ayah, and if you know the story, the woman went to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he had not received the revelation. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was doing what he knew to do during that time. He was, not intervening. He was allowing this process or this declaration of zihar to exist. However, God showed up. God heard the woman's suffering. God heard her pleas to the Prophet. And God saw that there was injustice here and there was inaction. God heard. God is all seeing. Whenever we are pleading to God, and whether people are responding, God hears us. So who is the pleading woman? We are the pleading woman. I am the pleading woman. Everybody on this call is the pleading woman. And even though we're talking about this within the context of this pleading woman who was a woman with agency, actually, all of us, in different times, different spaces, call on God in need, but we're speaking of this pleading woman within the context of an actual woman who is pleading and calling on God. But this is definitely applicable to everybody in this space on this Zoom. So who else can be the pleading woman? Our daughters, our sisters, our cousins, our nieces, our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers are all pleading women. Who else are pleading women? There are pleading women around the world. Women we don't know. People outside of our ethnic or racial communities in the United States. Like Asian American women who go under attack right now.
That's a pleading woman.
Yes, the pleading women. Women who are in other countries like the Uyghur women in China or the Tigray women in Ethiopia or women in other countries where rape goes unprosecuted and where women's bodies are used as battlefields. Pleading women are women in the workplace who are not treated, not paid the same as men. You know, we experience societal injustices where misogyny is allowed to exist. We are all pleading women, whether we have direct connections or whether they're people who are in the broader societal context within the United States as well as abroad. And as I stated earlier, even though we're speaking specifically about pleading women, we are all pleading children of God at some point. So some causes of pleading individually are domestic violence, sexual assault, rape, including marital rape, child marriage, controlling behaviors. And I'm not going to go into the list of controlling behaviors. We can talk about emotional and educational and economic, verbal abuse. Also, the person or the women could be pleading in the workplace or in the societal context of sexual harassment, lower wages, limited career advancement opportunities, health disparity, and targeted because of dress. Now, remember in the last two Ta'leems, I did watch them, and they were very inspirational. And we're talking about, you know, hijab in the context of hijab. And so we're talking about women who are targeted because those who wear the scarf or hijab or kamar, but also women who are physically attacked for wearing miniskirts and other clothing that is considered less modest as well. We are all pleading women. But we serve a God who is the regulator. And we go to verse 2. And the revelation reads, "Those of you who sinfully or disobediently divorce their wives by comparing them to their mothers should know that their wives are in no way their mothers. None can be their mothers except those who give birth to them. What they say is certainly detestable and false, yet Allah is truly ever pardoning, all forgiving." In this ayah, God sent a clear revelation protecting women's rights. Maybe I'm thinking about, you know, gender revolution or human rights revolution. I'm thinking revolution. And actually, in some ways, I'm going to clean this up because some ways revelations are revolutions. And we're talking about change. We're talking about improving, you know, our lives. So, but God sent a clear revelation protecting women's rights. God heard her. God saw her. And this controlling behavior, this zihar, was not acceptable. You know, if you don't want, if God basically said, if you don't want to be her wife, then divorce. Similar to the prophet, peace be upon him, people come to us pleading for help. Do we help? How do we help? Do we always follow custom? Do we do what's right? Do we pass judgment? You know, first we must listen and learn. God places us in the position of helping someone for a reason. So the nice thing about this virtual Zoom session is that I can share resources. I'm going to share 3 handouts from an organization called HEART, which is an organization that addresses gender-based violence in the Muslim community, specifically sexual violence. Other organizations are Peaceful Families Project, a nonprofit organization devoted to preventing domestic violence with a particular focus on Muslim families. Muslim families of diverse cultural, ethnic, racial and backgrounds, as well as FACE, which is an organization, an acronym for Facing Abuse in Community Environments, whose mission is to foster safe community environments by holding abusive religious and community leadership accountable. So I'm sharing these 3 cards from HEART to you because they have acrostics, and I like acrostics because they're easy to remember. So if someone comes to you pleading, you should first respond with rahma, which is compassion. You should respond with the R, respond by listening. First, you should reflectively listen to what the survivor is telling you. Don't speak, don't pass judgment, don't comment. Your role at that moment is to listen. You should affirm and believe. Too often, survivors are not believed. What was she wearing? We trust, her husband would never do that, or that leader would never do that. We must, believe. The statistics are very, very, very small as far as people who lie about abuse. And so our first responsibility is to affirm and believe. And then we should honor cultural and religious context values. Sometimes we want to say, well, perhaps she should, not believe what she's believing, or maybe she should shift her cultural values, and maybe her values aren't what they need to be. That's not our role. Again, our role is to honor her cultural and religious context and values as we're in the process of showing and demonstrating compassion. We also need to maintain privacy, especially in communities, cultural or ethnic communities or religious faith-based communities. Too many people want to know what's going on, especially in organizations. The entire board of directors do not need to know what's going on to this particular person. And so it's important to maintain the privacy of individuals when they've experienced some type of violence, when they confide in you. And then always provide resources and information. And this is what I'm trying to do during this talk today, is provide some resources and information. And then secondly, in addition to preparing and providing prevention and fulfilling our amana, we want, which is our trust, we can do the following. Again, another acrostic: acquire knowledge. Again, we want to go beyond what this talk is and find additional knowledge and resources to understand the ways in which domestic violence or sexual violence or other types of gender-based violence show up in people's lives and in communities. We want to minimize victim blaming and rape culture, which I touched on a little bit earlier. Victim blaming happens when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act is held entirely or partially responsible for the harm that occurred. What was she wearing? Where was she at? Why was she alone? Why wasn't her husband with her? Where was her brother? She should not have been there. Victim blaming. Allied with trained professionals. Again, even when someone comes to us in trust, we also need to make sure that we know where the resources are at. We know our limitations so that we can provide a person who's coming to us for help with additional support. In addition to that, we want to normalize seeking information, help, and services. Too often in our communities of color, we don't access trained professionals. We don't feel comfortable around mental health professionals for multiple reasons. And so however, we know that it's important and necessary to access mental health and behavioral health services at times. We need to break the cycle. It's not false when we hear the adage, hurt people, and too often people are stuck in that cycle or don't know any other way of being, or have experienced something from life and don't know how to work through that trauma and work through that pain. And so we have to access services, and we need to know where to go when we're faced with providing a resource for someone. And then we want to also address root causes of violence, racism, misogyny, gender inequalities, concentrated power, oppressive and controlling policies that foster a system, that create a system of where this type of behavior can exist. It didn't just show up. And oftentimes people are raised in or exist in an environment where this type of behavior, where women are not heard or allowed to exist. We all know this. I'm speaking to the choir here in many ways. We know this. And then we also want to handle reporting through trauma-informed processes. Too often we're not, when we are reporting or not reporting, sometimes we don't report because of, You know, we know what reporting can do to our community. We know how the penal system has impacted our community, has not furthered justice in many ways. And so sometimes, you know, not reporting violence is informed by that. And so when we're providing services to somebody, we have to also understand that context depending on who the person is. You know, as I'm going into this third ayah, this third ayah is my favorite ayah because we serve a just God. We serve a God who wants us to have justice. And so this third ayah reads, those who divorce their wives in this manner, then wish to retract what they said, must free a slave before they touch each other. This penalty is meant to deter you, and Allah is all aware of what you do. I want to first focus on the words retract and penalty. Too often, folks who harm us individually or systematically want to get off with, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to do it. I won't do it again. I love this verse because, you know, God requires us to forgive just as God has forgiven us. But as I read this, and maybe this is my interpretation, but as I read this, God has hit the game. Yes, we should forgive, but God is also rendering consequences. God is rendering penalty as to prevent it from happening again. The I'm sorry is not enough. The wish to retract what they said is not enough. God seeks to penalize in order to deter it from happening again, to prevent it from happening again. And what I love about this, because we serve a just God, we serve a God that seeks justice. Now, I praise God that we don't live in a society where physical enslavement exists anymore in this country, and we continue to work to eradicate in other countries. But as we do not physically exist in this society with enslavement, we know that mental bondage is much stronger than any physical bondage. And we need to free our enslaved minds. And what do I mean by that in the context of this talk? We need to free ourselves from toxic masculinity, which impacts us and can be implemented by both men and women. I'm going to say that again. Toxic masculinity can be implemented by both men and women. We need the freedom from toxic masculinity in our homes and in our workplaces and in society. So what is toxic masculinity? And some of us may be familiar with this term. And, you know, it's, you know, like everything else, you know, the language changes, but the activity is always the same, that the labels may change. So what is toxic masculinity? It's the cultural pressure for men to behave a certain way. So why did you just say that? So it's the cultural pressure for men to behave a certain way, typically of domination and aggression. And because of this definition, you don't have to be a man or woman to further this behavior in the home or the workplace. You can be an enabler as a mother or as a colleague who chooses to turn a blind eye. You can say, you know, oh, it's all right. You know, he smacked his girlfriend. You know, she shouldn't have talked back. Or you could see some behavior, you know, men, you know, doing as some people have said in the media with certain leaders, past leaders, you know, that was just boy talk. It was just locker talk, you know, fostering and this society, this toxic masculinity that creates the environment for gender-based violence, for domestic violence, for sexual assault. So, you know, this is how men and women are enablers. You don't have to be a man to further this toxic masculinity, and we all have a responsibility to address it. Remember that God has placed us in the lives of others to ask us for help for a reason. As believers, we are required to act as we are called to do. We are required to be the vessel. And hopefully all of us are here. You know, we want to and we need to use our mouths, use our hands, use our feet, use our spirit in order to reflect God's light and God's love. And so finally, the third card that I'm sharing with you today is Adala. And in Adala, that is our trust. And so with Adala, I'm sorry, Adala is not trust, Adala is justice. And so with Adala, we need to allocate, we're talking about changing our behaviors, rendering, the justice that needs to happen, making sure that something is sustainable so that it's beyond just the words of I'm sorry. So it's beyond just the time to connect and understand that actually something is sustainable. And I'm going to, tie this to even when we're talking about issues of social inclusion. We're talking about creating spaces where there's more gender inclusion, there's upward mobility, there's more equity in the workplace, because we're also talking about issues of equity. Too often we're stuck on, well, let me understand how she feels, or let me talk about what it must be like to be a Black woman. Well, that's good. That's a good place to start. But let's talk about my rights. Let's talk about increased wages for me and my family. Let's talk about something that furthers equity, that creates a changed behavior, something that is sustainable, something that is beyond just words, something that is actually furthering justice. And so when we're talking about justice and Adala, we're talking about allocating financial and human resources to make sure that change is sustainable. We're talking about determining, creating victim-centered restorative practices so that it's not just punitive, so that communities can heal and move forward, and that it's sustainable. We're talking about assessing risk to community and creating an action plan. We're not just talk, we're talking about changing a behavior individually within your home, as well as changing a behavior within society. But a plan needs to happen and a plan needs to be implemented. And we have to get to the root cause. We need to look for those root causes. Abuse does not happen in a vacuum. It is important to look internally and assess institutions and communities for possible gaps that may exist. Then we also must accommodate victims' needs. It's important part of victims' journey to healing is restoring their notions of safety and accommodating their unique needs in a timely manner. And then finally, the last point in this is honoring transparency and accountability. So finally, I want to end with saying that, even though we put this within the context of women, we know that all of us, each and every one of us, men and women, are all children of God, and Allah sees all of us. We're all pleading women, if you will. God sees all of us. God hears all of us. And it's important for us to trust God. And if God puts us in the pathway of someone coming to us pleading for help within their homes or help within the workplace, or someone we may not know, but we know that injustice is occurring, God has equipped us with the tools, whether it's our voices, whether it's our resources that we can leverage, whether it's our spirit, our energy, and our ability to organize. God has placed us in the path with knowledge in order to be a vessel for God's love and for God's light. Thank you.
Mashallah, mashallah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What a wealth of information you shared with us. Dear believers, what I'm going to ask you to do now, so get next to your computers. If you were cooking dinner, or lunch or whatever you're doing, get next to your computers real quick. We're going to do a waterfall activity. So she gave us so much information. I want to kind of go through that a bit and ask some expounding questions. Please feel free to also put your questions in the chat. She gave us guidelines, and she shared 3 separate guidelines that we can use to help victims and to understand, right? The first one started off, and I'll give you, they were all acronyms, right? That we can remember them by, but the first was respond and listen, so the R. So when I count to 3, I want you to write in the chat. So you can write it in now, but when I count to 3, you're going to push enter, and we're going to have a waterfall of responses, right? So what was that first acronym that she gave us as a guideline to help victims, right? It started with an R. So go ahead and write it in the chat now. Do not push enter yet. Just write it in the chat.
Rockma.
Hey, who's talking? Stop giving it. 2, 3, enter. I misspelled it too. So everybody else was just waiting to see what other people said, I'm guessing, right? So be ready for the next one. I see people are still filling it in. Dr. Harriet, if you can talk a little bit about the victim blaming, that was the next one, I'm sorry, about affirming and believing, the A in that. What does that look like in practice? So how do I affirm if someone comes to me? How does that look like? What does that sound like? If you can give examples to the believers so that we can hear that language and start becoming accustomed and familiar with that language, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, that sounds like, you know, listening. That sounds like you are not alone. It sounds like I believe you. It sounds like just listening. You know, sometimes people come to us and they just need someone to hear them, someone to be present. Someone, you want to thank them for trusting them with their story. You know, sometimes it's hard. It's extremely hard for survivors, for victims to reveal something that has happened. There's shame that's tied to that. Sometimes they feel like, even without talking to others, they feel like they brought that on themselves. But when they finally get that courage to tell somebody, you want to acknowledge that you're honored to be the person that they revealed that to, and you want to just listen without any type of judgment at all.
It makes perfect sense. It reminds me of a time I was taking a course on students with disabilities, and one of our exercises was during break that one of us would close our eyes for break and go do whatever we're supposed to do during break, whether it's going to the restroom. And someone said, like, am I supposed to talk to them or not? Right? And it was like, what would you want? Like, if you were the one that was what had the disability in this case, or in your case, you know, what would you want? You would want someone to listen. You would want to feel heard. And so I think that's the human part of us. So thank you for that example.
And the thing is also, since you mentioned that, as far as people wanting to be heard, oftentimes survivors and victims, well, victims first and then survivors, once they move through of domestic violence or sexual assault, they feel like they're alone in the world, that there's nobody experiencing what they're experiencing. It's a very lonely place. And so when they finally do reveal that secret, if you will, to someone, that they're being abused by their spouse or being abused by someone that they trust or who's trusted by the community, it's a really, really big deal.
No, absolutely. I'm absolutely with you. All right, believers, I hope you guys are by your computers and ready again for that second waterfall. So what was the second one? And if you don't remember the Arabic, you can also write the English in to help you remember as a guide that Dr. Harriet gave us. If you can put them in the chat now, and at the count of 3, we can enter them in together. Okay, let's see what we got, good people. And it's okay if you don't remember. This is what this is for. You know, as an educator, we know that, you know, we have to do things more than once, and that helps us to cement it. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, waterfall. If you can tell us, because Amana is faith. And so one of the things you talked about when you gave us these guidelines, which I think, first of all, are excellent. And I love that they are, you know, with us in mind as Muslims, right? I think that is beautiful. So you talked about victim blaming. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? I've seen I've seen it happen, and people not actually aware that they're doing it, right? And it's not from a malice place, but it's received in a very disheartening way. And so if we can bring awareness as to what that looks like, I think we can assist in helping believers avoid it.
Oh my God. I mean, that shows up in so many different ways, depending on the context. You know, thinking about a woman who may be attacked and, you know, attacked, what was she wearing? Was her skirt too short? Were her pants too tight? She knows that, or, you know, maybe she shouldn't have been wearing a scarf on her head, or maybe she shouldn't have been in that community, or maybe he shouldn't have been in that community, or you knew what that place was like. What, depending on where she's at, or if it's a place that's where the person doesn't understand our faith tradition, they may say, well, you know that religion is like that, if it's someone. But basically, the victim blaming comes with when they are blaming that person for the harm that has happened to them. They should not have been in that neighborhood, or she should not have taken that job, or she should not have taken that position, or she should not have worked late with her boss, or she should not. I mean, there's so many things that she should not have done, blaming her for the harm that has come to her. Her miniskirt or her position with her boss does not give it does not give him or whoever the right to physically or sexually assault her. So that's kind of what it looks like. It does show up more subtle. I can't think of any ways right now, but it definitely does show up more subtle. We don't realize sometimes those are the blatant ways, the obvious ways that we sometimes, but we do that all the time. We do it all the time in a loving way, you know, in a way that we're trying to process what is happening to sometimes. When this happens to people, when it happens to loved ones, we're trying to process what has happened. And sometimes our first response is blaming, well, this would not have happened to you if you did not do this. And unfortunately, sometimes it stays there with you. This would not have happened to you if you were not there, or if you didn't do this, or if you know, weren't at these places.
I think those are really good examples. And I love to hear from some of the believers as well. Either ever experienced or seen or heard something that you would identify as victim blaming, and what does that sound like? What does that look like, right? I know I have been witness to cases, and you know, initially not really, you know, I'm not sure that's how you should respond, right? Like, it's that feeling like, maybe you're turning this table in the wrong direction. You know what I mean? And I know that we don't have those intentions most of the time, right? But it's not having the education and knowledge around what that looks like and what that feels like, you know? I think that's that heightened awareness and the education around it is important. If you could talk a little bit about, so you gave us a wealth of information. As a masjid, what are some of the things that we can do, right? Some of the things that we can put in place, right? At least initially, as we begin to, and I know you talk having a plan, right? What does that plan look like? If you can give us some guidance around that, I think it'll be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the amana, you know, what we can do individually, or again as a masjid. Seek, you know, have resources available. Like we're having this conversation right now. This is just a touch. I mean, a little bit of a conversation. You know, ideally, if the masjid wants to continue, you know, having full on, you know, domestic violence training. What does domestic violence look like? What's the cycle of violence as it relates to domestic violence? What does sexual assault look like? What does sexual violence look like in all of its different, you know, gender-based violence and all of its different facets? Masjid Al-Taqwa needs to have a list of resources, community resources, shelters, speakers who can come in and speak on different topics, as well as behavioral health professionals who can provide support, healing in the space as well. But, you know, we sometimes, you know, we leave it to the behavioral health professionals. We do necessarily need, we absolutely need to connect people to behavioral health professionals. But sometimes I talk to people, because all of us do not, even those who are in need, and we know that we're in need, do not access behavioral health professionals. That's why I talk about this all the time, that if everybody has some basic awareness that this is what domestic violence looks like. And when your daughter or when your cousin or when your niece is showing up talking to you, or your son or your nephew is behaving in a particular way, or your daughter is behaving in a particular way, that you have enough information to provide guidance to them. You know, in the event that, yes, you may need, you're going to refer them to somebody to get that controlling behavior under control. But in the event that it takes them a while to do that, you know, in addition to the masjid, in addition to institutions, in addition to the behavioral health professionals, we also need to have enough information, not just to protect ourselves and to know what this looks like for ourselves, but also to be that resource for individuals when they come into our space.
You know, I love that. And you know, I'm going to be leaning on you to help us get there with all of your knowledge. I did get a direct message in the chat asking if you know how upfront Muslim women are speaking about their abuse in comparison to other women in other communities, and like what is kind of the data on that, because there is victim blaming in our community and in other communities, I'm sure as well. But it makes, you know, just bringing to mind the hate that women received around the Me Too movement, right? So do you have any information that you could share with us around that?
No, I don't have any statistics around the victim blaming as it relates to Muslim, what Muslim women specifically, if I hear you correctly, what Muslim women experienced as a result, or are you talking about just generally how the statistics around Muslim women experiencing domestic violence or sexual assault?
Yeah, experiencing it, but also being upfront, right? It's one thing to experience it, and it's another kind of to unveil it to the world.
Yeah. So, and I do have that statistic. I don't have it with me. I'll see if I can bring it later on. As it relates to victims and survivors, it's pretty much on par with national statistics as it relates to domestic violence and sexual assault. As far as revealing it and confiding in someone, it's lower. It is lower within the Muslim community. I do remember that from the statistics that I recently read.
Yeah, which also brings to the point that we need to make sure that we do those things that you said, right? Educate folks and let them know what it looks like. And also, and I know this is more of a buzzword than it has been in past, right? But to use it in lieu of not having another, to provide a safe space where people can have those conversations and can reveal some of those dark spaces so that they can get the assistance that they need. And right, and if our masjids are not a space where they can do that, where is, right? So that statistic is really revealing.
Right, and understanding that the spaces that are not necessarily Muslim or faith-centered, that they can access those spaces as well. You know, sometimes people are afraid to go outside of our communities as well, for many reasons. I mean, reasons of rejection, reasons of victim blaming, reasons of possibly being a space that does not honor your culture and your values. That is real, and that prevents people from accessing those resources as well. So there's screening that needs to happen all around.
Absolutely. And when you just triggered a thought. So when we think about spaces that don't value our culture, right? We are very familiar with that, especially as African American women, right? Beyond being African American Muslim women, it is you know, we're the strong ones. We can deal with it. We know how to handle it, right? And so, what does that look like for Black women? If we're talking about kind of the wraparound supports and what you see out kind of in the research and in your own experiences.
That's a great question, and you know, it's like everything else, and sad to report. This was an issue when I was executive director of a domestic violence agency in Massachusetts in 2002, and it still exists today, where Black women are not treated the same way when it comes to domestic violence services as white women. That's, you know, like you said, you know, Black women are are perceived as being strong. So, you know, if I have one bed and there are two women here, a white woman and a black woman, I'm most likely to give it to the white woman because, you know, she needs more support. That black woman, you know, she's figuring it out. You know, she's dealt with racism and oppression, and she's not as fragile, you know, and she can figure it out. She can withstand, we know that the statistics are that Black women can withstand physical pain when she's in the hospital trying to, you know, to deliver children. So she can also experience, and she can also withstand, you know, the emotional pain as well. That's the perception because, you know, because the way we speak, the way we move, that we don't feel pain, that we don't feel sorrow, we don't feel sadness, that we're not abused. Or we are perceived to be able to, because there are stereotypes around Black women, you know, with sass and with being angry, that she must have, again, brought it on herself. She must have talked back when she was defending herself. Was she really defending herself? You know, so these are the kinds of, this is how we are treated and how we are received when it comes to domestic violence. And which is why, you know, oftentimes, you know, it's difficult for us to access services or to be expected, or that's also some of our reticence in accessing services as well, because we know how we've been treated in systems.
Absolutely. And I'm not trying to dominate the conversation. So if you do want to talk, just put it in the chat. I'm gonna keep rolling with my sister here because me and her could talk forever. So, you know, this reminds me of a conversation that we had yesterday, me and a few believers at the mass year. We were, you know, we're doing rehab on the space, and, you know, we're using heavy machinery, like, you know, and the sisters are using heavy machinery right next to our brothers. And we were saying, you know, yes, we could use heavy machinery, but we still want you to open the door for us, right? Like, so it is seeing the complexities and the beauty and the complexities of the strength and the vulnerability of Black women, right? Seeing those things and appreciating and applauding all of it, and not just saying, well, heck, she could do the heavy machinery, let her go get her own chair, right? You know, and so, like, how does that look in our interactions, right? And so, and part of it is us being vulnerable, you know, with right? And us providing a safe space and a listening ear in order for that to happen. That's just so essential.
Absolutely. I love that. Our complexities as Black women.
Yes. And we
like our hair. We can mix it up. We can mix up hair up and, you know, tie a scarf this way and that way. I'm gonna go there.
Look, can you feel me? Can you feel me, right? That's a whole nother conversation. And I'm gonna get the believers involved again, and get their minds working. So just as a rewind, our first guidelines was Rahma and the mercy. The second guideline was faith, Amana. We had the third one, and I'm gonna give you the English and ask you to think of one word that you got out of that last one, right? When we talked about justice and adala, right? What was one word that or key thing that you got out of that? We're gonna do a waterfall, so go ahead. I'm gonna give you a few moments to put something in, anything that you grasp out of that. It does not have to be the acronym, but what was something that you grasped out of that? All right, here we go. And I'm gonna give you 30 more seconds, because it may be one word, it may be a comment, it may be anything, but I want to give you an opportunity and us to waterfall and see all of the things that you got, especially out of that last section there. And then we have a question that we'll address after that, inshallah. All right, here we go, good people. 1, 2, 3, enter. All right. So I'm gonna ask you to get into a little bit. So root causes were, as you can see, it came up twice. And so can you expand a little bit about those root causes? And I know many of us know some of those, right? When we talk about it's this, you know, there's a common theme of white privilege and like there's a common strip that runs across many of these injustices and oppressions, right? So can you talk about some of those root causes, and then we'll go into Sister Hakima's question that she has in the chat. And again, as a reminder to believers, please do put your name in the chat, and I'll call on you to speak, or you can also put your information in the chat as we wind down to this last 5 minutes, inshallah.
Yeah, so when we're talking about root causes, we're talking about, you know, systemic violence that hasn't been addressed. You know, people haven't received the services they needed to move beyond systemic violence, and it shows up in many different ways, furthering violence. It's not an excuse, but it's just a systemic reality that exists. We're talking about misogynistic behavior, boy talk. I can't say that often enough. When I heard that boy talk, locker talk, that's okay. That's not okay. These are root causes that continues this type of behavior. We talked about toxic masculinity. I don't know how many mothers and sisters, you know, this is the way a man's supposed to be, you know, man up, treat your wife this way, and what have you, you know, and that's part of many communities' identities, or many individuals or families' identities, or what have you. And these are root causes that we need to work through. I can think about, you know, just even this, this is not domestic violence. In a way, it could be domestic violence. It's more gender-based violence globally. When we think about FGM, female genital mutilation, that's done by women. It's done by the aunties in the community, even here in the United States. You know, continuing this practice of violence, you know, root causes. This is part of our culture. This is part of our identity. So those are a couple of examples.
No, this is really great. And since you spoke of toxic masculinity, we'll end on that one with a kind of a clarifying question that was in the chat. Can you kind of describe what those behaviors are? So this says, did you say that toxic masculinity describes the behaviors that lead to aggression and the abuse of women? And I must give you high accolades, because I've never heard the juxtaposition of toxic masculinity with it could be, you know, it could be given both by men and women. I think that is the expansion on that definition is huge and is very impactful and meaningful. But if you can expound on that a little bit as our last space of conversation for Ta'leem today.
Yeah, I said that toxic masculinity is the cultural pressure for men to behave a certain way, typically domination and aggression. And you know, it's simple. You know, we experienced, you know, I'll be 50 this year. I'm getting used to saying that. I'll be 50 this year. And I remember toxic masculinity growing up. It's, you know, it's catcalling. I mean, that's the beginning. You know, we don't, you know, it's all right for men to catcall, you know. It's accepting, you know, anger, displaced. You're angry at your boss, but then you're going to come and treat me a particular way, but we know that you're not going to treat your boss that way. And I don't like to blame music, but it's, you know, and myself, you know, I've listened to the music, so I'm not blaming art, but, you know, we also know that this type of depending on how you listen to it, how often you listen to it, it does put people in a different space that continues to further an aggressive behavior, if you will. Again, when we don't see other ways of being, when we see that this is you're brought up to believe this is the only way that you can be a man on the streets, that you have to be tough, that you have to be hard, you have to be like this way, or, you know, somebody's going to treat you, somebody's going to, you know, you're going to get jacked, you're going to be killed if you're not this way. So we teach our sons to be this way because it's been part of our survival. You know, it's been part of our survival as Black people, and specifically as Black men. It's been part of our survival if we didn't, and it's also response in many ways to the oppression, to the systemic oppression that we've experienced. So that's how it shows up in different ways. And sometimes, you know, it's difficult to, I mean, it's easy to talk about, you know, catcalling, but sometimes things that we do as parents, we don't necessarily see how that could lead to certain behaviors as our sons, you know, grow up, or even as how we continue to enable some of that behavior.
Absolutely. I see Dr. Gloria.
Yes, that is the example. That is it.
Statement made by Celia. We all know her to be her. Right?
Wait, that's it.
Yes, absolutely. No, these are great examples, and I agree. I think we have to have we have to even do a separate Ta'leem on music, because I know as a young woman getting ready for for partying, I'm playing Tupac and Biggie and getting hyped, right? And so like it has an impact and an effect, right? And it's undeniable. And so we have to talk about how we negotiate that, because it's here, right? And how do we negotiate within our communities and make sure that the impact of it doesn't have an adverse and negative effect. And so, oh my God, mashallah, mashallah, many times over. Please show your love for our beloved Dr. Harriet, for her wisdom today, and her time and her love. I love her. I love everything that she does for our community. I want to end with a dua for her and for all of the believers. May Allah guide us. May He protect us. May He make us both men and women protection for each other, and put love between us. May He make our community situated in a way that we give all the love in the world that is needed, and that we take away those things that are not of pleasure to Allah. Again, thank you, Dr. Harriet. This will be on our YouTube channel, and we look forward to future Ta'leems with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
I'm humbled.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.